Some secrets are kept to protect a kingdom. Some secrets are kept to protect a heart. And some secrets, when they finally break free, burn everything to the ground. The room was beautiful. That was the cruelest part. Ivory walls. Floor-to-ceiling windows draped in silk curtains the color of cream. A four-poster bed dressed in sheets so soft they felt like clouds against her skin. Fresh flowers delivered every morning, lilies, always lilies, arranged in crystal vases that caught the morning light and scattered rainbows across the ceiling. Beautiful. And absolutely, suffocatingly empty. Serafina Voss pressed her palm flat against the window glass and stared out at the world below. The Ironvale pack stretched endlessly beneath her, rolling hills of dark pine forest, the silver ribbon of the Cael River cutting through the valley, the stone-paved streets of the village where wolves moved freely, laughed openly, lived fully. She could see them. They could not see her. That was by design. She had been here for 47 days. She had counted every single one. 47 mornings waking up alone. 47 breakfasts left outside her door on a silver tray. 47 evenings watching the sun bleed out over the mountains while the rest of the pack gathered in the great hall she had never once been invited to enter. She was Luna of Ironvale. The most powerful female title in the entire Northern Territory. And not a single soul in this kingdom knew she existed. She pressed her forehead to the cold glass. Her breath fogged the surface, blurring the world outside until it looked like a dream. Maybe that's all it is, she thought. Maybe none of this is real. But the ache in her chest was real. The silence pressing down on her shoulders was real. And the sound of his voice, deep, cold, deliberate, was absolutely, devastatingly real. You will stay in this room. You will not attend pack events. You will not speak to the elders, the warriors, or any member of my inner circle. You will not leave this wing without my explicit permission. His golden eyes had held no warmth when he said it. No apology. No explanation. Just those words, delivered like a sentence. You will not. You will not. You will not. Alpha Caelan Draven had married her in a ceremony with no witnesses. No flowers. No celebration. Just a contract signed in ink the color of old blood, 2 rings exchanged in a room that smelled like cedar and cold stone, and a bond that snapped into place between them with the force of a thunderstrike, whether either of them wanted it or not. She had felt it. That electric, bone-deep recognition that every wolf was told about in childhood fairy tales. The pull. The warmth. The terrifying, undeniable certainty that this person, this stranger, was the other half of your soul. She had felt all of it. And she had watched his jaw tighten the moment it hit him. Watched him step back. Watched something like fear, raw, unguarded fear, flicker behind his golden eyes before the walls came crashing down. And then he had locked her in this room and walked away. That was 47 days ago. She had replayed that moment so many times the memory had worn grooves in her mind. The bond between them hummed constantly, a low, persistent frequency in her chest, like a second heartbeat that wasn't her own. Through it, she could feel the ghost of him. His moods. His tension. The restless, prowling energy of an alpha who was always, always moving. She wondered if he could feel her, too. She wondered if he tried not to. She turned away from the window. The room suddenly felt smaller than it had a moment ago. She had a name. She had a history. She had a bloodline that, if anyone in this pack ever bothered to look, would answer every single question they had about why their alpha had married a stranger in secret and then hidden her like something shameful. Or something dangerous. What are you hiding, Caelan Draven? The bond pulsed once in her chest. Warm. Sharp. Like a warning. She pressed her hand over her heart and felt it beat beneath her palm. And what are you hiding about me? Somewhere on the other side of this kingdom, an alpha stood at the edge of a war council table, staring at a map that could mean the salvation or the annihilation of everything he had built. And in the back of his mind, underneath the strategy, the politics, the carefully constructed armor of authority he wore like a second skin. He felt her. He always felt her. And that was exactly the problem. Chapter 1. 3 months before the locked room. The first time Seraphina saw Caelan Draven, she thought he was the most beautiful and the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. He stood in the doorway of her father's study like he owned it. Like he owned everything. 6'4" of carved discipline, golden-eyed and dark-haired, jaw set in a line that suggested he had never once in his life said something he didn't mean. He wore black, all of it, jacket, trousers, boots that had clearly crossed 100 miles of rough terrain without complaint. He looked like winter given form. He looked like a decision that could not be undone. Seraphina was 23 years old, standing in the corner of her father's study holding a stack of pack ledgers she'd been working on all morning, and she understood, with terrible, immediate clarity, that her life was about to change. She just didn't understand how completely. Alpha Draven. Her father, Matthias Voss, rose from his chair with the careful reverence of a man who knew exactly how much power was standing in his doorway. "Thank you for coming." "I didn't come for pleasantries, Matthias." Caelan's eyes moved through the room once, precise and assessing, and then they landed on her. Stopped. Something shifted in his expression, too fast to read, too controlled to interpret. His nostrils flared slightly. Just barely. If she hadn't been watching so carefully, she would have missed it entirely. The bond hadn't formed yet. But something had. Some first spark of recognition that neither of them had words for. He looked away. "We need to discuss terms," he said, returning his gaze to her father. Seraphina set the ledgers quietly on a side table and began to edge toward the door. "Stay." Her father's voice was soft, but it wasn't a request. She stilled. Caelan glanced at her again. Brief. Guarded. "She doesn't need to be here for this," he said. "She is the terms," Matthias said simply. The silence that followed was so absolute Seraphina could hear her own pulse. "She is the terms." She turned to face her father fully. Matthias Voss looked older than he had this morning. Smaller. Like something vital had been quietly leaking out of him for months in this room. This moment was where the last of it drained away. "Papa," she said softly. "What is this?" He didn't answer her directly. He looked at the Alpha. "The Ironvale Pack needs an alliance to survive the Eastern Conclave's advance," he said, speaking as though he were reciting something he had rehearsed. "The Voss bloodline carries a gift your pack cannot manufacture, cannot replicate, cannot acquire by any means other than bond. You need what our blood carries. I need protection for my people." He paused. "Seraphina is my only heir." Caelan was very still. "You're offering me your daughter," he said flatly. "I'm offering you a bond that will save your kingdom." Matthias met his eyes. "And I'm asking you to save mine in return." The room felt like it was contracting. Seraphina stared at her father. She had grown up knowing that her bloodline was unusual. Knowing that the Voss gift, whatever it truly was something other packs had coveted for generations. Her father had always told her that their gift was their protection. He had never told her it would become her cage. "Papa," she said again, her voice fracturing slightly at the edges. "You're trading me. I'm protecting you." His eyes finally met hers, and what she saw in them was worse than anything she could have imagined. Not greed. Grief. He was grieving something he hadn't done yet. "This is the only way," he whispered. She looked at Caelan Draven. He was watching her now with an expression she couldn't decode. Not cruel. Not triumphant. If anything, he looked like a man who was standing at the edge of something he hadn't fully chosen and wasn't entirely sure how to survive. "You don't want this," she said to him directly. It wasn't an accusation. It was just true. His jaw tightened. What I want is irrelevant. Then we have something in common, she said quietly. Something moved behind his eyes. For one unguarded moment, something almost human broke through the surface. Then it was gone. I'll review the contract terms, he said, turning back to her father. Prepare the signing for Friday. He walked out without looking at her again. Serafina stood in the middle of her father's study as the door clicked shut, and she understood, completely, finally, with every atom of her being, that she had just become the answer to someone else's problem. The question was whether she would also become their downfall. Friday came like a blade. The ceremony was nothing. 4 walls. A notary. 2 witnesses she had never met and would never see again. The contract, 3 pages of formal pack law, signed and sealed with the Iron Veil crest, transferred her from her father's bloodline to her husband's authority with the efficiency of a business transaction. Her dress was white. No one had decorated the room. Caelan stood across from her and said the bonding words in a voice so controlled it barely sounded human. She said them back. Her voice shook slightly on the last syllable. His eyes met hers for exactly 3 seconds. Then the bond broke open between them like a dam giving way. She felt it everywhere. In her blood, in her bones, in the marrow of every breath she took. Warm and enormous and ancient, like something recognizing itself. Like 2 halves of a lock finally meeting the same key. She gasped. She couldn't help it. His hand, which had been holding hers for the pronouncement, went rigid. His fingers tightened once, involuntarily. She felt the tremor move through him before discipline crushed it back down. He felt it too. Of course he felt it. The bond didn't care about political arrangements. It didn't care about contracts or kingdoms or carefully constructed walls. It was older than all of those things, and it had made its decision. Mine, something in her whispered. She watched his face. His golden eyes went very dark. And then, with deliberate, devastating precision, he let go of her hand. The notary finished the pronouncement. They were married. He stepped back immediately, creating distance with the practiced ease of someone who had always known exactly how much space to maintain between himself and anything that could hurt him. My head of household staff will escort you to your quarters, he said. She blinked. My quarters. In the East Wing. He was already moving toward the door. You'll be comfortable there. Caelan. He stopped. Didn't turn around. The sound of his name and her voice seemed to do something to him, something involuntary, something he quickly subdued, but she felt it through the bond like a struck chord. Get settled, he said. We'll speak about the arrangement in detail tomorrow. He walked out. She stood in the middle of the empty room in her white dress, wearing his ring, carrying his bond, bound to his soul. And watched the door close behind him. Tomorrow never came. Instead, that evening, his head of household, a tight-lipped woman named Marin who spoke in clipped, efficient sentences and avoided Serafina's eyes, led her to the East Wing and delivered his instructions with the dispassion of someone reading from a list. The room was beautiful. You will stay in this room. You will not attend pack events. You will not speak to the elders. You will not leave this wing. And just like that, Serafina Draven, formerly Serafina Voss, became the Luna nobody knew. The secret her husband was ashamed of. The answer to a question the pack had never been allowed to ask. The night after the ceremony, alone in her perfect ivory room, she lay on the cloud-soft bed and stared at the ceiling while the bond hummed in her chest. She could feel him. Distant. Restless. Moving through the castle like a caged thing. If you can feel me, she thought toward the bond, half desperate and fully furious, then you know I'm not going to disappear just because you locked the door. A pulse. Warm. She pressed her hand to her chest. What are you so afraid of? Chapter 2. Day 12 of her imprisonment, Serafina found the passage. She had not been looking for it. She had been doing what she always did when the walls of the east wing closed in too tightly, pacing. 12 steps from the window to the fireplace. Turn. 12 steps back. The rhythm of it was almost meditative, a way to convince her body that it was moving even when it wasn't going anywhere. She was on her 43rd lap when her hand, trailing absently along the wall, found the seam. She stopped. Pressed her fingers to the wallpaper, thick, cream-colored, embossed with a pattern of climbing vines, and felt it. A gap. Barely a whisper of a gap, thin as a finger's width, running vertically from shoulder height down to the baseboard. She pressed. The wall gave way. Not dramatically. Not with a cinematic groan of ancient hinges. Just a quiet, balanced pivot, a section of wall swinging inward on a perfectly counterweight frame, revealing a narrow corridor beyond. Dark. Dusty. And absolutely, thrillingly hidden. Serafina stood at the threshold and felt, for the first time in 12 days, something other than despair. She felt curious. She grabbed the candle from her nightstand. The passage was barely wide enough for her shoulders, the ceiling low enough that she instinctively ducked. The walls were raw stone, old, much older than the east wing that had been built around them. Whatever this passage was, it had existed long before the room she'd been assigned. Long before, possibly, the current structure of the castle itself. She moved slowly, counting her steps. 42 steps forward. A turn to the left. 23 more steps. And then the passage opened, suddenly, completely, into a space that stopped the breath in her throat. A library. Not the castle's official library, which Marin had mentioned in passing as being on the 3rd floor, open to ranked pack members and elders. This was something else entirely. Smaller. Hidden. A circular room carved directly into the stone heart of the castle, shelves cut into the walls in concentric rings from floor to ceiling, packed with books and scrolls and leather-bound ledgers that looked old enough to predate the Iron Veil pack itself. In the center of the room, a low table. On the table, a single candle, fresh, recently burned, the wax still soft at the edges. Someone had been here recently. Serafina turned slowly, taking in the room. Her candle caught the spines of the books nearest her, and she read the titles with growing bewilderment. Bloodline Compendium, Northern Territories, Volume 7. The Voss Lineage, an incomplete record. Gifts of the Old Blood, Forbidden Documentation. The Prophecy of the Dual-Natured. She went very still. The Voss lineage. Her lineage. Her family's name, tucked into a hidden library in the castle of the man who had married her and locked her away. Her hand was not quite steady as she pulled the book from the shelf. It was old, decades old, the leather cracked and soft with handling. The pages were dense with handwritten notes layered over printed text, annotations in multiple hands spanning what looked like generations. She opened it to a page marked with a ribbon. The passage was underlined in fresh ink. The Voss bloodline carries within it the only recorded instance of the dual-natured gift, a convergence of alpha and oracle blood that, when fully manifested in a bonded Luna, grants the ability to see the lines of fate that govern pack bonds, territorial boundaries, and the outcomes of succession conflicts. This gift, which has been classified as both the greatest protection and the greatest threat to pack stability, has not been fully activated in a Voss descendant in 4 recorded generations. The conditions required for activation are? The page had been torn. Deliberately, carefully torn, the rest of the sentence missing, the knowledge severed right at the point of revelation. Serafina stared at the ragged edge of the page. Someone had known she would find this. Or they had been afraid someone else would. She pressed the book to her chest and stood in the hidden library while her mind raced through everything she thought she knew about herself and restructured it. Her gift. Her father had always described it vaguely: you carry something rare, little one, something that must be protected, but never in specific terms. She had always attributed this to his natural tendency toward careful understatement. Now she wondered if it had been something more deliberate. What did she carry? What did Caelan Draven know about it that she didn't? And why, had he married her for it and then locked her away where she couldn't use it? She was still holding the book 2 hours later when she felt the bond shift. A change in the frequency, the distant, restless hum of him going abruptly still. And then footsteps. Close. She spun toward the narrow opening she'd come through. The footsteps were coming from the other direction. There was another entrance. She barely had time to press herself back into the shadow of a tall shelf before the second passage opened and a figure stepped through, carrying a lantern. Not Caelan. A man she didn't recognize, younger, dark-haired, with the lean, coiled build of a trained warrior and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore no pack insignia on his jacket, which struck her as strange for someone moving freely through the castle. He crossed to the table. Set the lantern down. Reached for a scroll on the nearest shelf. And then he stopped. Turned his head with the slow, precise instinct of a predator who has just scented something unexpected. His eyes found her in the shadows. Neither of them moved. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. His voice was quiet. Not threatening, exactly. More like someone who has encountered a problem they didn't account for. "Neither are you," she replied. His eyes dropped to the book in her arms. The Voss lineage. Something shifted in his expression. Something that looked, uncomfortably, like recognition. "You're her," he said. "Who is her?" He looked at her for a long moment. "The Alpha's secret," he said quietly. "The one we've all been forbidden to mention." She felt the words land in her chest like stones dropped into still water. Rippling. Spreading. "Who are you?" she asked. "My name is Dax." He paused. "I'm the Alpha's brother." The bond surged without warning, a sudden, agitated heat in her sternum, as though Caelan could somehow feel that his most guarded secret had just introduced herself to his most complicated family member. "He doesn't know you're here," Dax said slowly. "No," she agreed. He looked at the book again. Looked at her. Made a decision she could see him making in real time. "Put that back where you found it," he said carefully. "And go back to your room." "Why?" "Because the answer to whatever you just read," he said, "is more dangerous than anything he's told you." He picked up his scroll. He walked back through the passage he'd come from. And then she was alone again, holding a book with a torn page, standing in a hidden room in the castle of a man who had everything to gain and, apparently, everything to lose. She put the book back. She went back to her room. She did not sleep. What was the dual-natured gift? What was he afraid she would become? And why did Dax, a man she'd never met, look at her like she was both the answer and the end of something? Chapter 3. Caelan Draven had not slept properly in 47 days. He stood at the window of his war chamber, a room that occupied the entire northern corner of the 4th floor, walls covered in territorial maps and Pack Alliance records, and stared at the dark line of the forest at the edge of his lands. 3 hours until dawn. He'd been here since midnight. The bond hummed in his chest. Always. He had been told, growing up, that the mate bond was a gift. Pure and absolute. The most stabilizing force a pack leader could possess, an alpha and his Luna, unified, their shared connection strengthening the pack's cohesion, their combined instincts sharpening collective decisions. He had never anticipated that the gift would arrive at the worst possible moment. He had never anticipated that it would feel like this. Like everything. He pressed his knuckles to the window glass and breathed. He could feel her right now, somewhere on the other side of the castle, awake, her emotions moving through the bond in complex currents he was learning, despite himself, to read. She wasn't afraid. That surprised him, still. Most people in her position would have collapsed into fear by now, isolated, powerless, trapped. She wasn't afraid. She was furious. And underneath the fury, so carefully maintained, so deliberately hidden, as though she knew he could feel it and refused to let him have it, something that ached. Don't, he told himself, stepping back from the window. Don't follow that thread. He turned to the map table. The Eastern Conclave had moved 3 of their border units in the last week. He had 22 days, possibly fewer, before they reached the outer edge of Iron Vale territory. When they did, the war that had been threatening for 3 years would stop threatening and start happening. And when that war arrived, the Iron Vale pack needed to be unassailable. Every alliance intact. Every vulnerability hidden. Every secret kept. He dragged a hand through his hair. A knock at the door. Come. Dax entered. His younger brother had the particular talent of looking casual in every situation that required seriousness, a habit that Caelan had always found both useful and deeply irritating. Right now, Dax leaned against the doorframe with his hands in his pockets and an expression that managed to be simultaneously relaxed and very deliberately careful. Caelan recognized that face. It was the face Dax wore when he had information he wasn't sure how to deliver. What? Caelan said flatly. The Conclave's Eastern Unit crossed Marker 7 tonight, Dax said. One of the border scouts sent word an hour ago. I know. I saw the report. Okay. Dax pushed off the doorframe. Wandered toward the map table. Studied it with exaggerated interest. And the Elder Council is requesting an emergency session tomorrow morning. I know that too. Elder Soren specifically is requesting confirmation that your personal arrangements are stable. Dax said the words carefully. Precisely. They've been asking more frequently. Caelan's jaw tightened. My personal arrangements are none of Soren's business. He seems to disagree. Dax glanced up from the map. He's also been talking to Counselor Vale, which, as we both know, means he's talking to half the Elder Circle. About what? About the fact that their alpha appears to be unmated. Dax held his gaze steadily. 47 days since your closed-door ceremony. No public announcement. No Luna presentation. No bond confirmation ritual. To the pack, Caelan, you are a single alpha heading into a war. He paused. That makes you a target. Caelan said nothing. He looked at the map. The Eastern Conclave's markers had moved closer since yesterday. There's a simpler solution, Dax said quietly. Don't. Let her out, Caelan. I said don't. She is your Luna. Dax's voice dropped, careful now, watchful. Whatever you're afraid of. I'm not afraid, Caelan said. The words came out too fast. Too hard. And they both knew it. Dax was quiet for a moment. I went to the hidden library tonight, he said. Caelan went very still. I know, Dax continued. I know you know, because you were the one who put the Voss lineage records there in the first place. He paused. She found the passage. The bond surged, a sudden heat that Caelan couldn't suppress quickly enough, and from the way Dax's eyes flickered, it was written across his face for a second before he shut it down. She went into the library, Dax said carefully. She found the Voss lineage book. She read the passage about the dual-natured gift before she found the torn page. He held Caelan's gaze. She doesn't know what she carries. Not fully. But she's asking questions now. Caelan walked to the window. He pressed both hands flat against the cold glass. She can't know, he said quietly. You can't keep her in the dark forever. I need more time. Time to do what? Dax stepped closer. Caelan. Think about what you're doing. You have a bonded Luna, a fully activated bond, one of the strongest I've ever felt in the atmosphere of this castle, and you're hiding her from the pack, hiding the pack from her, hiding her nature from herself, and heading into a war on 3 of our borders. His voice was steady but urgent. At some point, the thing you're protecting her from is going to be less dangerous than everything you're creating by keeping her locked away. Caelan didn't answer. Because Dax was right. He knew Dax was right. And it didn't change anything. You don't understand what happens if the gift activates, he said finally. His voice was low. Stripped of the authority and distance he usually maintained. Exhausted in a way he would only ever allow Dax to hear. You don't understand what they'll do to her. Tell me. The Eastern Conclave isn't advancing because of territorial ambition. He turned from the window. His golden eyes were hard and certain and deeply, quietly haunted. They're advancing because they know. About the bond. About her bloodline. He met his brother's gaze. They know what she can do, Dax. They knew before I did. They've been waiting for a Voss heir to bond with an Ironvale Alpha for 2 decades. He paused. Because when the dual-natured gift fully activates, when she is bonded and safe and her power reaches its peak, she won't just see fate lines. Dax was very still. She'll be able to rewrite them, Caelan said quietly. The silence in the room was total. She can alter pact bonds, he continued. She can break or seal territorial agreements at the root level. She can see the thread of succession in a bloodline and sever it. He looked back at the map. She is, in the language of the old records, the only living creature capable of peacefully or catastrophically ending the Eastern Conclave's dominion over the Northern Territory. He let that settle. They want to capture her, Dax said quietly. They want to control her. Caelan's voice was flat. And if they can't control her, they want to eliminate her. Before the gift activates. Before she understands what she is. He turned back to the map. The East Wing isn't a punishment. The isolation isn't rejection. His voice fractured barely, but Dax caught it. It's the only thing currently standing between her and an army that would tear this castle apart to get to her. Dax stared at his brother for a long, quiet moment. She doesn't know any of this, he said. No. And you haven't told her because? Because if she knows what she is, Caelan said, she'll fight. She'll push back. She'll refuse to stay contained, and I cannot protect her if she won't stay behind the ward. He exhaled. And because the moment she fully understands her gift and chooses to use it, freely, knowingly, the activation accelerates. He looked at his hands. And I am not certain I can protect her from what comes after that. Dax was quiet for a very long time. Caelan, he said finally, gently. She's already asking questions. She already found the library. She is not going to stay contained, ward or no ward. He paused. And keeping her ignorant doesn't protect her. It just means she'll be blindsided when it all breaks open. Caelan said nothing. Tell her, Dax said. Caelan turned back to the window. The forest was dark. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, low, warning, territorial. The bond in his chest hummed. Warm. Present. Hers. Tell her. He closed his eyes. He didn't answer his brother. But for the first time in 47 days, he turned from the window, not toward the map, not toward the next strategic decision, not toward the carefully maintained distance he'd constructed between himself and the woman sleeping in his east wing. He turned toward the door. He stood there for a long moment. Hand on the frame. Not moving. Not yet. Not yet. But closer than he'd been before. He knew what she was. He knew what was coming. And for 47 days, he had chosen to carry that knowledge alone rather than risk what it would do to her. The question was how long that choice could hold. And what it would cost when it finally broke. Chapter 4. Day 48. Serafina woke before dawn. Not gradually, not the slow, comfortable drift into consciousness that the cloud-soft bed should have allowed. She woke all at once, sharp and sudden, sitting upright in the dark with her hand pressed to her chest and her heart hammering against her palm. The bond. It had done something. Changed frequency, shifted weight, like a sound that had been playing at low volume for weeks suddenly turning itself up without warning. She sat in the dark and breathed and tried to understand what she was feeling through it. Him. Closer than usual. Not emotionally closer, not the distant, carefully maintained blankness he seemed to project through the bond most of the time, the deliberate neutrality of a man working very hard not to be felt. This was physically closer. He was in this wing. She was absolutely certain of it. She threw back the covers. She didn't think about it. Didn't weigh the decision. Her feet found the floor, her body found the door, and she was in the corridor before the rational part of her mind had time to construct an argument for caution. The east wing hallway was dark and still. Stone floors, wall sconces dimmed to their overnight minimum, the faint smell of old wood and cold air and, underneath all of it, cedar. She followed the cedar. 12 steps down the corridor. A turn left, past the door to the sitting room she'd never used, past the small balcony she'd stood on exactly twice. And then she stopped. He was standing at the far end of the hallway. Just standing there. Still dressed, jacket, dark trousers, boots that suggested he hadn't slept, his back to the wall, one shoulder leaning against the stone, arms crossed over his chest. The posture of a man who had been intending to do something and then lost his nerve midway through the doing of it. His head turned the moment she stepped into his line of sight. They looked at each other across 12 feet of hallway. The bond surged between them like a tide coming in. She watched something move through his expression, not blank, not controlled, something actually human and unguarded, before the walls rebuilt themselves with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd had years of practice at the construction. "Go back to bed," he said. His voice was low. Not cold exactly. More like someone keeping very careful control over a temperature they didn't trust. "No," she said. A beat of silence. "Serafina. Don't." The word came out steadier than she felt. "Don't say my name like that and expect me to simply turn around and pretend this isn't happening. Nothing is happening. You're standing outside my door at 4 in the morning. She crossed her arms. "Something is happening." He looked at her. Long enough that she could see the internal debate, the visible war between whatever had brought him here and whatever was now arguing vigorously for retreat. Retreat lost. He pushed off the wall. Walked toward her. Each step was measured, controlled, and yet she felt the effect of it, the bond responding to his proximity like a compass needle swinging north. Her skin prickled. Her breathing changed. Everything in her wanted to step forward to meet him, and she hated that, and she stayed exactly where she was. He stopped 2 feet away. This was the closest they had been since the ceremony. This close, she could see things the distance had hidden. The shadows under his golden eyes, dark and deep, weeks of inadequate sleep written plainly in the skin beneath them. The tension in his jaw that looked less like controlled authority and more like exhaustion maintaining form. The way his nostrils flared slightly when he was close to her, that involuntary tell that the bond was affecting him whether he acknowledged it or not. He was not unaffected. She'd known that. But seeing it, standing in it, was different. "I owe you an explanation," he said. The words seemed to cost him something. "Yes," she agreed quietly. "You do." He exhaled. Looked past her for a moment, at the wall, at the middle distance, at something she couldn't see, and then looked back. "Not here," he said. "Come with me." She almost said no on principle. She didn't. She followed him. He took her to a room she hadn't found in her explorations, a small, square study tucked behind the sitting room, furnished with 2 chairs, a fireplace that still held coals from earlier in the night, and a window that faced east, toward the first pale suggestion of approaching dawn. He built the fire back up with the efficient, unself-conscious movements of someone accustomed to doing things for themselves. She sat in one of the chairs and watched him and said nothing. When he sat down across from her, he looked, for just a moment, lost. Not the calculated, guarded figure who had walked out of rooms and delivered instructions through staff and maintained 47 days of deliberate absence. Lost. Like a man who had been holding something very heavy for a very long time and wasn't entirely sure how to set it down without dropping it. She waited. The Eastern Conclave is going to breach our outer border within the next 3 weeks, he began. She blinked. Not what she'd expected. They have been moving toward Iron Vale systematically for the past 8 months, he continued. His voice had settled into something steadier now, the tone of a man working from facts, which was apparently easier for him than everything else. On the surface, it's territorial. Resource rights, succession disputes, the usual political pretext that large packs use when they want to absorb a smaller one. He paused. That's not what this is. What is it, then? He looked at her. It's about you, he said. The words landed so quietly that it took her a full 3 seconds to register what he'd said. Me. Your bloodline. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, and for the first time she saw him at something close to eye level, not looming, not distant, just present and exhausted and trying to tell her something true. The Voss gift. The dual-natured ability. He held her gaze. The Conclave has known about it for 20 years. Longer than you have, I'd guess. They've been monitoring every Voss descendant, waiting for the right conditions. What conditions, she asked, though something in her already suspected the answer. A bond, he said. The gift doesn't activate in isolation. It requires the catalyst of a true mate bond, a fully formed, freely accepted alpha bond specifically, to reach its potential. He paused. Without it, you're a wolf with unusual instincts and slightly elevated insight. With it, you are. What? She pressed. What am I? The firelight caught his eyes. Something the Conclave has been trying to either own or erase for 2 decades, he said quietly. You can see the fate lines, Seraphina. The deep structural bonds that hold packs together, territorial agreements, lines of succession. You can see which threads are strong and which are fraying. He held her gaze. And you can change them. She stared at him. That's not, she stopped. Started again. I've never done anything like that. Because the bond hasn't fully activated. His voice was careful. Even. Like he was handling something he was afraid of breaking. Our bond, the ceremony, the connection, it started the process. But it hasn't completed. It won't complete until. He stopped. Until what? He looked at the fire. Until it's freely given, he said. Very quietly. On both sides. The silence between them stretched. She understood now. Completely. The locked room. The isolation. The 47 days of deliberate absence. It wasn't shame. It wasn't rejection. It wasn't even, entirely, fear. You've been keeping me hidden, she said slowly, working through it out loud, because if the Conclave knows the bond is forming. They move faster, he confirmed. They need to intercept before the gift fully activates. Once it completes, he stopped himself again. Once it completes, what? He looked at her. And something in his expression, some deep, undefended thing, made her breath catch. Once it completes, he said, you become more powerful than anything they can send against you. A pause. But the window between partial bond and full bond is when you're most vulnerable. That's when they'll come. And you didn't tell me any of this, she said. No. Because? He was quiet for a moment. Because I was trying to protect you without, he stopped. Corrected himself. Because I made decisions without including the person they most affected. He met her eyes. That was wrong. It was not a practiced apology. It wasn't flowery or elaborately constructed. It was just true. And somehow that made it worse and better simultaneously. 47 days, Caelan, she said softly. He flinched. Just slightly. Just enough. I know, he said. I thought. She stopped. Looked at her hands. The ring still on her finger, plain silver band, no stone, nothing decorative, just the fact of itself. I thought you were ashamed of me. That the marriage was a necessary transaction and you wanted me as far from your life as possible while still technically fulfilling the contract. No. The word came out fast and hard and without any of his usual deliberation. He seemed to surprise himself with it. No. That was never. He stopped. Reconstructed. That was never what this was. She looked up at him. He was watching her with an expression she'd never seen on him before. Not guarded. Not distant. Not the controlled authority of an alpha managing a difficult situation. Just him. Whatever was underneath all the armor. Something scared. Something careful. Something that was looking at her like she was both the most important thing in the room and the thing he was least sure he was allowed to reach for. What are you going to do? She asked quietly. He pulled back slightly. The alpha reasserted itself over whatever had just surfaced. But not entirely. Not as completely as before. I have a plan for the Conclave's advance, he said. 3 alliance reinforcements I've been negotiating for the past month. A defensive perimeter that should hold their initial push. He paused. But those are external measures. And the internal ones? He looked at her. That depends, he said carefully, on what you want. She blinked. What I want? I made this decision for you without asking. His voice was steady but something underneath it was not. I'm not going to do that again. He held her gaze. So I'm asking. Now. What do you want? She stared at him. In 47 days, nobody in this castle had asked her that. Nobody. Not Marin with her careful efficiency. Not the kitchen staff who left trays outside her door. Not her father, who had traded her like a political asset. Not this man, who had married her in a ceremony with no flowers and then disappeared. What do you want? She felt the bond pulse between them. Warm. Waiting. She had 100 things she wanted. She started with the most immediate one. I want out of that room, she said. A long pause. Done, he said. I want to meet the pack. Another pause. Longer. That's. He stopped. Started again. That increases the risk. If the Conclave has anyone inside Ironvale. Caelan. He looked at her. If I am what you say I am, she said quietly, steadily, then hiding me doesn't make me safer. It just makes me easier to take by surprise. She held his gaze. Let me out. Let me see this pack. Let me understand what I'm actually protecting. She paused. And maybe trust me with the information I need to help protect it. He stared at her. Something shifted behind his eyes, a slow, tectonic movement, like something very old and very heavy sliding into a new position. All right, he said. She almost didn't believe she'd heard it. All right? Tomorrow, he said. I'll take you to the Great Hall. We'll make it official. He stood, and she noticed that even when he was exhausted and something close to fractured, he still moved with that absolute, unself-conscious authority that seemed to be simply how he existed in the world. There are things I still need to tell you. Things that are, he paused. Complicated. I'm not afraid of complicated, she said. He looked at her. For a moment, one long, unguarded moment, something almost like warmth moved through his expression. No, he said quietly. I'm beginning to understand that about you. He moved to leave. Caelan. He stopped. She stood up. They were close again, not 12 feet of hallway, not the careful 2 feet of a managed conversation. 3 feet. Close enough that the bond was doing very specific, very distracting things to her awareness. "Whatever is coming," she said. "I'd rather face it knowing the truth than be protected by a lie." He held her gaze. The firelight was warm on his face. She saw it again, that flicker of something beneath the armor. Deeper than she'd caught before. Something that looked, if she wasn't imagining it, like the beginning of trust. "I'll remember that," he said. He left. She stood by the dying fire and pressed her hand to the bond in her chest. It was warmer than it had ever been. The room would no longer be her prison. But freedom, she was about to discover, came with a price. And the person willing to pay it wasn't always the enemy. Chapter 5. She wore gray. It wasn't a strategic choice. She simply reached into the wardrobe that had been stocked with clothes she'd never asked for and pulled out the first dress that didn't feel like it was trying too hard. Simple cut. Clean lines. The color of early morning clouds. She wore her hair down. She put on the ring. She had a terrible, inconvenient feeling about that last decision, like wearing it was a declaration rather than a habit, but she left it on anyway. Caelan came for her at 9 o'clock exactly. He knocked. Which was something. She opened the door and they stood in the hallway looking at each other with the slightly complicated awareness of two people who had said real things in a fire-lit room at 4 in the morning and were now navigating the daylight version of each other. He looked, rested was not the word, because she doubted he'd slept. But steadier. The decision he'd made last night had apparently settled something in him that the indecision had been costing. He was wearing charcoal and black. He was devastating and she was deeply irritated by that. "Ready?" he said. "No," she said honestly. "But yes." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. But adjacent to one. They walked side by side through the castle. The east wing gave way to the main corridors, and the main corridors were nothing like her quiet, isolated stretch of the castle. Wolves moved through these hallways, warriors heading to morning training, staff carrying supplies, two young women with the silver collars of ranked pack members deep in conversation that stopped completely when they rounded the corner and saw their alpha. And then saw her. The silence was remarkable. Caelan didn't slow down. "Luna Serafina," he said to the women, smooth and matter-of-fact, as though introducing his previously unknown wife in a castle corridor was an entirely ordinary Tuesday morning activity. She smiled at them. They stared. One of them, the braver one, dark-eyed and startled, managed a small bow before they both found the ability to move again and departed at a pace that suggested they had very important news to deliver to very interested people. By noon, Serafina said quietly, "The entire pack will know." "Good," Caelan said. She glanced at him. "I thought the point was secrecy." "The point," he said, "was keeping you safe while I secured the defenses. The defenses are as secured as they're going to get before the conclave moves." He paused. And Dax was right. Hiding you isn't safer. It just means they might get to you before anyone here knows to protect you. Dax was right. She filed that away. "You talked to your brother." "He talked to me." His jaw shifted. "At length." "He seems," she chose her words carefully, "like someone worth listening to." "He's insufferable," Caelan said. "And usually correct. It's his most irritating quality." She almost laughed. She caught it, but only just. The great hall was at the center of the castle, enormous, vaulted, its ceiling lost in shadow and its floor worn smooth by a century of pack gatherings. Long stone tables ran the length of it, currently occupied by the morning meal crowd. Warriors, ranked members, elder council representatives, household staff at the far end. The noise level when they entered was considerable. It dropped to absolute zero in approximately 4 seconds. she felt every eye in the room find her. It was not comfortable. It was also not the suffocating isolation of the East Wing. She kept her spine straight and her chin level, and she walked at his side across that hall like she had every right in the world to be there, because she did, and she was done behaving as though she didn't. The Elder Council table was at the far end, raised on a low dais. 5 wolves, all older, all sharp-eyed, all currently focused on her with expressions that ranged from surprise to calculation to something that looked, on the face of the one in the center, like careful, controlled alarm. Elder Soren, Caelan said, stopping before the table. His voice carried without effort, the natural projection of an alpha who had never once in his life needed to raise it to be heard. I'd like to formally present my bonded mate in Luna, Serafina Draven. Elder Soren was perhaps 60, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had been shrewd for so long it had settled into permanent calculation. His eyes moved over her with the efficiency of an assessment, landing briefly on the ring, briefly on the bond mark that was still new and faintly luminous at the curve of her throat, and then on her face. Alpha, he said. This is unexpected. Luna Serafina has been settling into the pack in private, Caelan said smoothly. She's ready now to take her place publicly. The words were flawlessly delivered. She almost believed them herself. Soren's eyes held hers for a moment longer than strictly necessary. Of course, he said. Welcome, Luna. The words were correct. The warmth was entirely absent. Something in her hindbrain, that wolf instinct that was always slightly ahead of conscious thought, registered him as a variable to watch. The rest of the elders were warmer. Elder Vesa, small and white-haired, actually smiled. Elder Callum, who had the look of a warrior gone administrative, nodded with what seemed like genuine relief. The hall had begun to murmur again, the controlled chaos of 200 wolves recalibrating around new information. Caelan guided her with one hand, barely touching, just the suggestion of his palm at the small of her back, the first actual physical contact since the ceremony, to a seat at the high table. She sat. He sat beside her. The bond between them sang. Quietly. Privately. Entirely theirs. She reached for her water glass and noticed that her hand was steady, and she was obscurely proud of that. The morning passed in a controlled, illuminating blur. She met warriors and ranked members whose names she catalogued with the methodical efficiency her father had trained into her, cross-referencing faces with the dynamics she observed in how they interacted with each other, with Caelan, and with the sudden and apparently destabilizing presence of a Luna they hadn't known existed. The reactions fell into 3 categories. The majority, cautious welcome. Curious, uncertain, but orienting toward acceptance. These were the wolves who looked at Caelan and saw that he was standing next to her without distance, without the performed discomfort that might signal regret, and took their cue from that. A minority, genuine warmth. Particularly the younger wolves, the women especially, who looked at her with something that seemed almost like relief, as though the presence of a Luna resolved something that had been quietly uneasy about their pack's leadership. And a small number, she counted for, all of them with connections to Elder Soren that she was able to map from observation alone, who looked at her with the polite blankness of people who were reserving judgment in a way that had nothing to do with openness. She filed all of it. She also, because she couldn't help it, watched Caelan. Watched him move through his pack. And discovered, with a disorientation that she hadn't anticipated, that he was different here. Not soft, he was never soft, she suspected that wasn't actually available to him, but present in a way he hadn't been with her. When a young warrior spoke to him about a patrol concern, he listened with total, focused attention, asked 2 precise questions, gave a decision that was clear and actionable. When Elder Vesa mentioned a concern about the outer settlement's food stores, he remembered a specific detail from 6 months prior that showed he'd been tracking the situation far before it became a problem. He cared. Deeply. Practically. Without performance. He cared about these people and this pack in a way that had built itself into the architecture of how he moved through a room. She found herself thinking of the war chamber she hadn't seen. The maps on the wall. The decisions being made at 4 in the morning while his pack slept safely, unaware. She found herself recalibrating. Not forgiving. 47 days was not forgiven in a morning. But understanding. And understanding, she was realizing, was its own kind of beginning. At midday, she found Dax. Or rather, Dax found her, materializing beside her at the entrance to the eastern corridor with the easy, casual precision of someone who had been waiting for the right moment. Survived the morning, he observed. Remarkably, she agreed. He walked beside her without invitation, which she found she didn't mind. Elder Soren spoke to 2 of his allies during the meal, she said. Right after the introduction. Dax's expression didn't change. You caught that. I was watching. What did you make of it? He's not just surprised, she said. He's calculating something. He wanted Caelan unmated, he's been pushing for that to be the public perception. The question is why. Dax was quiet for a moment. He has a candidate, he said carefully. Has had one for over a year. Alpha daughter from the Western Ridge Pack, strong bloodline, substantial territory, natural alliance value. He paused. He's been building the case to the Elder Council that Caelan should formalize a political bond there. She processed this. So I'm not just an unknown Luna, she said. I'm the obstacle to his preferred arrangement. You're the fact that makes his arrangement impossible, Dax said. Because the bond is real. Even Soren can't argue with a true mate bond once it's confirmed. Can he argue with one that isn't complete? Dax glanced at her. She held his gaze steadily. He'd been in the library. He'd seen the book. He knew what she knew. He was quiet for a moment. Soren doesn't know about the gift, he said finally. Most of the council doesn't. Caelan has kept your bloodline's specifics classified. A pause. But Soren is not a stupid man. He knows your name. He knows the Voss lineage carries something unusual. He's been looking into it. How much has he found? I don't know. Dax looked ahead. That's what concerns me. She absorbed that. I need access to the rest of the records, she said. Not just the hidden library. The official pack archives, lineage records, conclave communications, anything related to the dual-natured gift. Dax stopped walking. Turned to face her. He looked at her for a long, assessing moment. You're not what I expected, he said. What did you expect? Someone who needed to be protected. He paused. Someone passive. Your brother made the same mistake, she said. It's a family trait, apparently. Dax's expression broke into something that was almost, wonderfully, a real smile. I'll get you the archive access, he said. Thank you. Don't thank me, he said, turning to walk away. Thank me after Caelan finds out and decides how he feels about me helping you go around him. I'm not going around him, she said. I'm going ahead of him. Dax glanced back. Even better, he said. And he was grinning now. He has absolutely no idea what's about to happen to him. She watched him go. The bond pulsed in her chest. Across the castle, she could feel Caelan, deep in the war chamber, she thought, his energy focused and intense and moving through the familiar patterns of someone working a problem. She added herself to the problems he was working. Ready or not, she thought toward the bond. A pulse back. Surprised. Warm. He'd felt her. She smiled, and it wasn't entirely kind. She had a gift she hadn't activated. An enemy she couldn't see. A husband who was starting, terrifyingly, to feel like something real. And the sinking, electric certainty that the conclave was closer than any of them knew. Chapter 6. The archive was 3 levels underground. Dax got her in at midnight, a combination of his own clearance and a passkey that he produced with the specific confidence of someone who had been borrowing things that weren't his for his entire life. He left her at the archive entrance with a lantern, a warning to be out before the 4 o'clock guard rotation, and the parting observation that she had a better strategic mind than most of Caelan's war council. She considered that, then filed it under useful and descended the stairs. The Ironvale archive smelled like centuries. Old paper. Dust. The particular dry coldness of deep stone. She moved through the outer stacks quickly, recent records, administrative files, the mundane business of a functioning pack, and went deeper. The historical records were in the inner vault. Less organized, more dense, the kind of collection that had accumulated across generations of leaders who each had their own system and none of them had ever reconciled the differences. She found the conclave files within the first hour. She read for 2 hours after that. When she finally sat back, her hands were not quite steady. The picture she had assembled from letters, communiques, and diplomatic records was significantly worse than Caelan had told her. Not because he had lied. Because he hadn't known all of it. The Eastern Conclave's interest in the Voss bloodline dated back 60 years, 2 generations before her. A conclave elder named Vorthus had made the original discovery, cross-referencing old blood records with documented instances of the dual-natured gift across Northern Territory history. His conclusion, preserved in a letter so carefully worded it took her 3 readings to understand its full implication, was that the gift, when fully activated in a bonded Luna, didn't merely allow the reading and rewriting of fate lines. It destabilized them. Specifically, it destabilized the Conclave's primary source of power. The Eastern Conclave's authority over the Northern Territory rested on a 60-year-old succession bond, a magical territorial claim anchored in blood and pack law, renewed each generation, that gave them dominion over resource rights, border determinations, and Alpha Ascension protocols in the Northern 6 territories. Including Ironvale. A dual-natured Luna, fully bonded and fully activated, could see that bond. Could see its foundation. Could see, according to the oldest records, the deliberate manipulation that had been built into its origin, the false bond, the coerced submission, the succession threads that had been artificially severed to prevent Ironvale's line from ever rising to challenge conclave authority. She could see it. And she could undo it. Not with violence. Not with war. With the precise, surgical alteration of the fate lines themselves. The conclave didn't want to capture her because she was powerful. They wanted to capture her, or eliminate her, because she was the proof. She was, walking and breathing and existing within the Ironvale bond, the living evidence that their dominion over the North had been built on stolen ground. And when her gift fully activated, she wouldn't just see it. Every bonded alpha in the Northern Territory would see it too. Through her. She sat in the cold archive with the lantern flickering and this knowledge sitting in her chest alongside the hum of the bond and felt the shape of everything rearrange itself. He'd said she could rewrite fate lines. He hadn't told her it was because the conclave had already done it first. She gathered the most critical documents, careful, precise selections, the kind of evidence that could not be dismissed or recontextualized, and she went back upstairs. He was in the war chamber. Of course he was. She pushed the door open without knocking. He spun from the map table, hand going instinctively to the blade at his hip, a warrior's reflex, not a weapon of intended use, and then stilled when he saw her. She closed the door behind her. Crossed to the table. Spread the documents across the map. You didn't tell me all of it, she said. His eyes moved over the papers. Something shifted in his face. Where did you get these? The archive. The archive is restricted. I know. She met his gaze. Where did you think I was going when Dax gave me the access key? He went very still. Dax. Don't be angry with him. She pressed her fingertip to the letter from Conclave Elder Vorthus. This is 60 years old. Did you know? A long pause. Some of it, he said carefully, The succession bond, she said. The Conclave's claim over Iron Vale, over all 6 northern territories. You knew it was built on manipulation. I knew it was contested. His jaw was tight. I didn't have proof I could take to the Continental Council. That's what I am, she said quietly. I'm not just a weapon against the Conclave's advance. I'm the proof that dismantles the authority that makes the advance possible. She held his gaze. When my gift activates, when it fully completes, every alpha in the north will see what the Conclave has been hiding. The territorial bond will collapse. Ironvale becomes a free pack. All 6 territories become free. She paused. And the Eastern Conclave loses everything. He was very still. Yes, he said finally. You've known this. I've suspected it. The records I had were incomplete. He looked at the documents she'd laid out. These are the pieces I was missing. And you were going to tell me. He met her gaze. Honest. When I had a strategy to keep you safe through the activation, he said. When I wasn't sending you into that with nothing but a locked door between you and the people who want to stop it from happening. She looked at him. The frustration was still there, it didn't dissolve simply because his reasoning was comprehensible. 47 days didn't evaporate. But underneath the frustration, she was starting to be able to hold 2 things simultaneously. He had been wrong to keep her in the dark. He had been trying, in his broken, overcorrected, excessively autonomous way, to protect her. Both of those things were true. Caelan, she said. He waited. The gift doesn't activate on your timeline, she said. It's not a strategy you can schedule. She watched his face. It activates when the bond completes. When it's freely given, you said. On both sides. She paused. Which means you trying to control the conditions while simultaneously keeping me at arm's length is, she tilted her head. Counterproductive. His expression did something complicated. I'm aware, he said. Very quietly. Are you? She stepped slightly closer. The bond responded immediately, that warm, tide-like surge of proximity. Because from where I'm standing, you've been running every conceivable strategy except the obvious one. Which is? Stop managing me, she said simply. And be honest with me. Actually honest. Not strategically honest. Not information rationed for my protection honest. She held his gaze. If we are going to face what's coming, together, then it has to be together. Actually. Not you 10 steps ahead making decisions and me catching up after the fact. He stared at her. The firelight was warm. The bond hummed between them, and she let herself feel it fully for the first time, didn't hold it at a cautious distance, didn't try to manage her own response to it. She let herself feel the weight and warmth of it, the terrifying, certain, ancient recognition of it. And she watched him feel it too. His eyes went dark. His breathing changed. I don't know how to do this differently, he said. And there was something raw in it, not vulnerable in a way that collapsed the walls entirely, but real. Genuinely real. I have spent 6 years building this pack into something that could survive what's coming. 6 years of every decision being mine to make and mine to carry and mine to answer for. He held her gaze. I don't know how to share that. I know, she said. I can see that. It's not, he stopped. It was never that I was ashamed of you. I know that now. She held his gaze. But I didn't, for 47 days. He exhaled. It was the most unguarded sound she'd ever heard from him. I'm sorry, he said. 2 words. Completely without decoration. She believed them. Show me the defense plans, she said. He blinked. The maps. The alliance reinforcements. The perimeter strategy. She moved to the table. Show me all of it. Let me look at it with what I know from the archive. She met his eyes. Two minds, Caelan. That's what a bonded pair is supposed to be. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he moved to the table, stood beside her, and began to show her his war. They worked until dawn came through the window. Side by side at the map table, voices low and focused, the careful, friction-generating process of two people learning how to think together. He was precise and strategic, with the long view of someone who had been reading this particular battlefield for months. She was lateral, cross-referencing what she'd read in the archive with what she saw in the patterns of the Conclave's movements, identifying connections he hadn't made. He listened to her. That was what surprised her most. Not tolerantly, not with the patient condescension of someone waiting for their turn to speak. He actually listened. Reconsidered. Twice he picked up a marking tool and moved a notation on the map because of something she'd pointed out. It felt, unexpectedly, like breathing. When the first gray light hit the window, she was aware, suddenly, fully, of how close they were standing. Their arms almost touching. The cedar and coldstone scent of him close enough to breathe. She looked up. Found him already looking at her. Neither of them spoke. The bond was very loud. He took a slow, deliberate breath. "There's something else you should know," he said quietly. She waited. "The Conclave made contact with someone inside Ironvale," he said. "I don't know who. I've suspected for 2 months. Someone with elder-level access." He held her gaze. "Someone who may have been reporting your presence here before I made it official this morning." Ice moved through her. "Soren," she said immediately. He looked at her. "It's a possibility," he said carefully. "Not confirmed. I watched him this morning. He wasn't surprised by me. He was recalculating. There's a difference." She held his gaze. "He already knew I was here." Caelan's jaw was very tight. "If that's true, then the Conclave has known about the bond for weeks," she said. "And the 3 weeks you estimated for their border breach might be optimistic." She looked at the map. At the red markers of the Conclave's eastern units. "They're not waiting for the formal activation timeline, Caelan. They're moving on the bond itself. On us." His hand, resting on the table, moved. Not much. Just the smallest shift, toward her. A half-inch of movement that he didn't seem to be entirely aware of. "Then we don't wait either," he said. "What does that mean?" He looked at her. What does that mean? She could see him turn the question over, see him weighing the precise honesty of the answer against every carefully maintained boundary he'd constructed. "It means," he said, with deliberate, careful precision, "that the distance I've been maintaining, between us, in this bond, is a vulnerability I can no longer afford to keep." She was very still. "Caelan. I'm not saying it to pressure you," he said immediately. "I'm saying it because it's the truth, and you asked me to tell you the truth." His golden eyes held hers steadily. "The bond completes when it's freely given on both sides. I'm a pause. A breath. I'm not at a place where I'm waiting for strategic reasons anymore." She stared at him. "Then why are you still standing there?" she asked softly. He looked at her. The map table was between them. He moved around it. Stopped a foot away. She turned to face him. This close. Just this close, close enough to feel the warmth radiating off him. Close enough that the bond was nothing subtle and nothing distant, just a roaring, certain, inevitable thing in the center of her chest. His hand came up. Slowly. Tentative in a way that nothing else about him ever was. His fingers, warm, careful, curled around her jaw. She breathed. His thumb traced the edge of her cheekbone. Just that. Just that small, careful touch. And the bond flared like a struck match, not the quiet hum of proximity but something deeper, brighter, the bond straining toward its own completion like a current finding its ground. They were both completely still. This is not going to be simple, he said quietly. I should warn you of that. I never asked for simple, she said. You should probably ask for simple. Caelan. Yes? Stop talking, she said. A pause. And for the first time, in the grey gold light of a castle dawn with a war 3 weeks away and a traitor somewhere in their walls and a gift that could rewrite history waiting in her blood, Caelan Draven smiled. It was brief. Unguarded. Real. And it was the most dangerous thing she'd seen yet. The walls were coming down. But the storm hadn't arrived. And inside their own walls, a traitor was already moving. Chapter 7. The next 4 days moved like held breath. She was out of the East Wing. Officially. Publicly. The pack adjusted around the fact of her, some warmly, some carefully, all with the particular attention that wolves paid to anything that altered the power dynamics of their world. She attended the morning council. Sat at Caelan's right hand. Said little. Observed everything. She learned the pack. She mapped it the way her instincts told her to, not through the official hierarchy, which was clearly drawn on paper, but through the actual living architecture of loyalties and tensions and histories that governed how people actually moved and spoke and deferred. She identified Soren's network within the first 2 days. 6 wolves, 2 elders, 3 high-ranking warriors, and 1 household administrator, who all oriented toward him with the specific calibration of people who had aligned their interests with a leader they expected to shape the pack's future. She also identified the gap. The administrator. A woman named Petra, assigned to the castle's external communications, letters, courier management, the routine traffic of a pack in contact with allies and trade partners. Petra, who had been in her position for 4 years. Petra, who had access to every piece of correspondence that moved in or out of Ironvale. Petra, who had been observed by Serafina on day 2 giving Elder Soren a folded piece of paper in the corridor, quickly and quietly, in the specific manner of someone delivering information that was not intended to be seen. She told Caelan on the evening of day 3. He went very quiet. The kind of quiet that was not absence, it was the concentrated silence of something large and powerful choosing not to move. You're certain, he said. I'm certain I saw it. I'm certain it fits a pattern. She met his gaze. I'm not certain of Soren's motive. I am, Caelan said. He looked at the fire. He's been Elder Council Chair for 11 years, he said. When my father was Alpha, Soren controlled the actual governance of this pack while my father focused on military concerns. He built his authority carefully. Strategically. He paused. When I took the Alpha position, I restructured the Council's authority. Reduced Soren's direct influence. His jaw tightened. He has every reason to want an Alpha Luna bond that he can influence. A mate he hand-selected, from a family whose interests align with his. He looked at her. And every reason to want to remove the obstacle. Me, she said. You. So he's been feeding information to the conclave, she said. About the bond. About me. Helping them track the activation progress. She thought through it. Which means the 3-week window is already compromised, Caelan confirmed. They'll know the bond is strengthening. They may accelerate. We need to confirm it before we move against him, she said. If we accuse Soren without proof, we fracture the council at the worst possible moment. Agreed. He paused. Do you have an idea? She looked at him. Yes, she said. But you're not going to like it. The plan was simple. Elegant, even. Caelan hated it. Not the strategy was sound, and he knew it was sound, which was most of the reason he hated it. He hated it because it required her to be visible. More specifically, it required her to be visible in a way that made her look vulnerable. If Soren is funneling information to the conclave, she said, he's doing it through Petra's courier access. Which means any message about my condition goes out through official channels. She met Caelan's eyes. We give him a message to send. We feed him false information, Caelan said slowly. We tell him the bond is struggling. That I'm resisting completion. That the activation timeline has stalled. She paused. If he's in contact with the conclave, they'll receive that information and adjust their approach. We'll see the adjustment in their movements. She looked at the map. And we'll know. And if they respond to a weakened bond by accelerating the attack? Then we're prepared for them earlier than we would have been otherwise. She held his gaze. Either way, we force their hand before they're ready to force ours. He stared at the map. She could see him running the angles, all of them, the way he always did, the way she was beginning to recognize as simply how his mind worked. The message needs to be convincing, he said finally. Yes. Which means it needs to come from a source Soren trusts. He paused. From someone close enough to the bond to credibly report on its state. Dax, she said immediately. I was afraid you'd say that, he said. Dax has been helpful. Dax has been catastrophically helpful and is going to be entirely too pleased with himself when you tell him the plan. She smiled. She couldn't fully help it. He caught it, that slight softening she hadn't entirely managed to suppress, and something moved in his face. You should do that more, he said. She stilled. Do what? Smile. His voice was quiet. Unguarded in the particular way she was learning to recognize, the specific register that meant he was saying something real, something he hadn't fully pre-approved before it arrived. The bond pulsed. I find, she said carefully, that there is more to smile about than there was a week ago. He held her gaze. That is a very measured statement, he observed. I am a very measured person. You pushed my War Council map 2 inches to the left and reorganized my entire eastern perimeter strategy in 40 minutes. That is also measured, she said. Relatively. His mouth curved. There, that almost smile again. Still brief. Still unguarded. Still absolutely catastrophic to the careful, controlled distance she'd been trying to maintain between his gravity and her own. Dax, he said, returning to the plan with the slightly effortful focus of someone redirecting. Dax, she confirmed. I'll brief him tonight. I already did, she said. A pause. Of course you did. He's enthusiastic. Of course he is. She bit the inside of her cheek. He saw it anyway. You're enjoying this, he said. I'm enjoying being useful, she said, which was true, and which also was not the complete truth, and from the way he looked at her, he knew the difference. Dax delivered the false information to Soren's network the following morning through the particular art form of visible discretion, saying something intended to be overheard in a corridor where the right ears were conveniently positioned. The Luna is struggling. The bond is meeting resistance. The Alpha is concerned. By afternoon, they had confirmation. Not from Soren directly. From the Conclave. A courier, not through official Iron Veil channels, but through a third-party trading post that Dax had been monitoring since Caelan's suspicions first formed, arrived at the eastern border with a communication addressed to a code name they'd found in the archive records. A code name that corresponded to an Iron Veil internal contact. The message was short. Maintain position. Do not activate countermeasures. We move within 10 days. 10 days. Not 3 weeks. 10. Caelan read the intercepted message twice. Then he set it down very carefully on the war table, the way someone sets down something they might otherwise put through a wall. Soren moves the timeline up when the bond appears weak, she said. Which means he's been reporting something that made them think we had more time. The bond progressing faster than expected. She looked at Caelan. He's been trying to slow the activation from the inside while buying the conclave time to position. He's been managing both sides of this, Caelan said. Yes. For how long? At least since our ceremony. She paused. Possibly before. He may have been the one who arranged your father's original contact with the Voss lineage, the one that led to the marriage agreement. She held his gaze. He may have engineered this entire situation. The silence was very complete. Caelan's expression was controlled in the way that pressure controlled things. I need to handle Soren carefully, he said. Publicly. In council. If I move against him privately, his allies fracture the council in retaliation. He looked at the message. But I cannot leave him in place with 10 days until the conclave moves. Tomorrow's council session, she said. He looked at her. Bring the evidence to council tomorrow, she said. All of it. The courier communication, the archive records, the pattern of Petra's transmissions. She paused. And let the council see it themselves. Don't present it as your accusation. Present it as the truth and let them arrive at their own verdict. If even one of his allies moves to defend him. They won't, she said. Not with that evidence in front of them. Pack law is very specific about conclave collaboration. She met his eyes. And the wolves on that council, even the ones who've been oriented toward Soren, they're Ironvale wolves first. When they understand that he's been feeding information to an enemy that is 10 days away from a military breach, she paused. That's not a political alliance. That's a betrayal. Caelan held her gaze for a long moment. You've thought about pack law, he said. I've had 47 days and an excellent archive, she said. Something moved through his expression that she was starting to recognize not as an almost smile but as something quieter and deeper and more significant. He trusted her. She could see it forming. Could feel it through the bond, a new warmth, different from the attraction and the recognition. The specific, solid warmth of someone deciding to lean on something because they believe it will hold. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, she agreed. Soren had 10 days to execute a plan he'd spent months building. Tomorrow, they would take that plan apart. But the conclave didn't wait for council sessions. And that night, the first wolves came over the border. Chapter 8. The alarm came at 2 in the morning. Not through the bond, through the actual alarm, the deep resonant bell in the castle's east tower that the Ironvale pack hadn't sounded in 14 years. Serafina was awake before the second ring, already moving toward the door, already reaching through the bond. He was awake. Already moving. Already gone from wherever he'd been. She found him in the war chamber in 90 seconds. He was already fully dressed, already at the map table with 3 senior warriors, already issuing orders with the clipped, precise efficiency of someone who had run tactical scenarios for this exact situation more times than she could count. He glanced up when she came through the door. A flicker of something, relief, she thought, that she was all right, automatic and immediate, and then back to the map. Eastern border, marker 11, one of the warriors, a woman with a scar running jaw to chin who moved with lethal precision, introduced as Commander Rail, was saying. 40, possibly 50 conclave wolves. Not a full force. A vanguard unit. Testing the perimeter, Caelan said. Looking for gaps. Our patrol unit is holding the line but they're outnumbered 4 to 1. Pull the threshold company to their support. Don't engage the full unit, hold position, force them to commit. He moved a marker on the map. If this is a probe, we let them think the defense is thinner than it is and identify their approach vector for the main force. He paused. If it's an early push. It's too small to be a main push, Serafina said from the doorway. Every head in the room turned. She moved to the table. 50 wolves at marker 11, she said, looking at the map. But marker 11 is the strongest point in the eastern perimeter. You've had the heaviest fortification there since the first conclave threat 3 months ago. She looked up. They know that. Anyone with Ironvale intelligence knows that. She traced a line on the map. This isn't a probe of your defenses. It's a distraction. Caelan's eyes sharpened. He looked at the map. Marker 7, he said. Marker 7, she confirmed. Lighter garrison. Natural forest cover on the conclave approach. And she looked at him. Close to the castle route. He swore, quiet, controlled, but absolutely sincere. They're not testing the border, he said. They're creating a corridor. To the castle, Commander Rail said. To her. The word wasn't said. It didn't need to be. Triple the Marker 7 garrison, Caelan said immediately. Move the second vanguard to the forest line between 7 and 9, don't position them at the marker, position them in the coverage. Let anything that moves through think it's clear until it isn't. He looked at Rail. Seal the castle's eastern approach. Nobody in or out without my direct authorization. He paused. And find Soren. Rail's eyes flickered. Alpha? Elder Soren, Caelan said, very quietly. I want him located and held in his chambers. Respectfully. A pause. With guards on the door. Rail didn't ask for explanation. She nodded. She left. The other two warriors followed, the room clearing with the decisive speed of people who had trained for exactly this. Caelan turned to Seraphina. Just the two of them. The bond between them was electric, not with intimacy, with urgency. The specific, focused charge of two minds oriented toward the same threat. The council, she said. The evidence against Soren. Gets presented now, in whatever form it takes, he said. Emergency session, dawn, all elders present. He looked at her. Soren contained evidence in front of the remaining council, and Iron Veil rallied before the conclave realizes their distraction hasn't worked. He paused. Can you manage the council presentation? She blinked. By myself? With Dax, he said. I need to be at Marker 7. You don't need to be at the front personally, Caelan. My warriors need to see me there, he said simply. That's not ego. That's pack cohesion. He held her gaze. And I need to know the inside of this castle is secure. The council, the evidence, the elder alignment. He paused. I need someone I trust to handle it. Someone I trust. The words landed in her chest alongside the bond. I'll handle it, she said. I know you will. He moved toward the door. Stopped. Turned back. She had 1 second of warning before he crossed back to her, crossed the remaining distance between them, and his hand came up to cup her face with that same careful, deliberate warmth as before, but more certain now. Less tentative. His forehead came down to touch hers. Just that. That single point of contact. She felt the bond surge between them, enormous, warm, straining toward itself. Be careful, he said quietly, his voice low against the top of her head. You too, she said. He pulled back. Looked at her for 1 moment with his golden eyes and everything he wasn't saying yet but that lived very clearly in the space between them. Then he was gone. She turned to the map. She had work to do. Dawn. The Emergency Elder Council convened in the Great Hall with Soren conspicuously absent from his chair and 2 of his allied elders visibly uncertain about whether that uncertainty was something they should display. Dax presented the evidence. Seraphina stood at the head of the table, at the Alpha's chair, which she had hesitated over for exactly 3 seconds before sitting in it, because she was the Luna of this pack and there was a war beginning outside the walls and hesitating was not something she could afford today. She presented the archive records first. The conclave correspondence. The 60 years of documentation. The succession bond manipulation that underpinned the conclave's authority over all 6 northern territories. She watched the faces around the table as the scope of it registered. Elder Vesa went pale and then very still, the particular stillness of someone absorbing something that rearranges their understanding of their own history. Elder Callum's expression went from surprise to fury with the directness of a man who had spent 30 years as a warrior and had no patience for betrayal. Then the courier communication. The Petra transmissions. The pattern of information flow that ran directly from Soren's network to Conclave Command. When she finished, the silence in the room lasted a long time. Elder Soren, Elder Callum said, his voice very controlled, has been feeding pack intelligence to the Eastern Conclave for, at minimum, the past 3 months, Dax said. Possibly longer. During which time, Callum continued, they have been using that intelligence to position for an attack that is currently underway at our eastern border. Yes, Serafina said. Callum looked at her. Luna Serafina, he said. What does the Alpha request? She held his gaze. A formal elder verdict on the evidence of collaboration, she said. Pack law is clear on the standard for conclave contact during active territorial conflict. The Alpha trusts the Council to apply it. She watched the word trust land. Watched Callum and Vesa and the 3 other uncommitted elders look at each other. Watched Soren's 2 allies look at the evidence and then look at each other and then look at the floor. One by one, the hands went up. 7-0. The verdict was unanimous. Elder Soren would face the formal tribunal. Ironvale's council closed ranks. Serafina stood at the head of the table, at the Luna's place, in the Alpha's seat, in the center of the pack she'd been hidden from for 47 days, and felt the bond burn bright and certain in her chest. Something was shifting. Not just in the politics. Not just in the council. In her blood. She pressed her hand briefly to her sternum. The gift, quiet for so long, no more than a background hum she'd attributed to simple wolf instinct, was doing something new. Something warm. Something that felt, if she'd had the vocabulary for it yet, like waking up. The council had held. The eastern border was engaged. And inside Serafina Draven, something ancient and powerful was beginning to open its eyes. Chapter 9. He came back at midday. Covered in mud and pine needles and what was, hopefully, not blood, though there was some of that too, dried at his temple from a cut that had already begun to close with wolf healing speed. His jacket was gone. The dark shirt beneath it was torn at the shoulder. He looked like someone who had spent the morning fighting through forest terrain. He looked, despite all of this, devastatingly alive. She met him in the corridor outside the war chamber before he'd made it fully inside. She had not planned to do that. Her feet had simply moved toward the bond without consulting her. He stopped when he saw her. Assessed her quickly, the automatic, alpha-level scan for injury, and then visibly released something when he found none. The border held, he said. I know. Rael sent word. She looked at the cut on his temple. You're bleeding. It's already closing. I know, she said again. She stepped toward him anyway. He stayed very still as she reached up, she had to lift onto her toes, he had 5 inches on her and she refused to find that as significant as it was, and pressed 2 fingers gently to the cut. Not to examine it. Just to touch him. She felt his entire frame still in a way that was entirely different from his usual controlled stillness. Felt the breath he drew in, deliberate, careful, like someone managing something that required management. The council voted, she said, her voice quiet in the corridor. Unanimous. Soren is held pending tribunal. His network has been isolated. Petra has been suspended and her access revoked. You handled it, he said. We handled it. She looked up at him. Close. His head had bent toward her, instinctive, that gravity she'd been aware of since the first morning and fighting since then. Dax, the council, the warriors at the border. She held his gaze. It was Ironvale, Caelan. Not you alone. He looked at her. You're trying to tell me something, he said quietly. I'm trying to tell you, she said carefully, that you don't have to carry all of it. The silence that followed was not empty. It was the kind of silence that had weight, that was full of everything that had moved between them over the past days. For in the morning in fire-lit rooms and hands on maps and foreheads pressed together in the dark. Serafina, he said. Her name in that specific register. The one that meant he was not managing his voice anymore. He knew immediately. The Caelan River stone, he said. 2 miles into the forest. It's a territorial marker that predates the pack by a century. He held her gaze. It's also currently between us and the Conclave's advance. She looked at him. Then we need to move fast, she said. The gift had arrived. The bond was complete. And 2 miles into a contested forest, with an army 72 hours away and a traitor neutralized but not alone, everything was about to come to its head. Chapter 10. They moved at dusk. 6 of them. Caelan, Serafina, Dax, Commander Rael, and 2 of Rael's best scouts, experienced wolves who moved through forest terrain like water finding its level, barely audible, barely visible. Serafina wore dark clothing and the practical boots that Marin, in a remarkable reversal of all previous interactions, had produced with efficient, determined helpfulness when she understood what was needed. She had pinned her hair back. She was not wearing the ring. She had put it in her pocket. It felt like carrying something essential in a safer place. The forest closed around them as they moved east, dark pine and old oak, the ground soft with layers of fallen needles, the air cold and resinous and alive. The bond between her and Caelan was fully open now, no managed distance, no deliberate blankness on either side, and she felt him at her flank with a depth of awareness that was almost spatial. His alertness. The way his attention moved, fluid and constant, tracking the forest around them. She was doing the same. But differently. She could see the lines in the forest, too. The territorial boundary of Ironvale land, a warm, golden thread running roughly through the treeline at the pack's border, and beyond it, where conclave-influenced territory began, a different quality of light. Colder. With that same stain she'd seen in the castle, the same falsified weight of an imposed claim. I can see the boundary, she said quietly, for Caelan's ears only. How close? The pack boundary is about 100 meters east of our current position. She studied the lines. The Conclave's claim overlay is heavier near the river. That's where the anchor is. How do you know it's the anchor? It's where the false threads originate. She frowned. Like a root system. Everything else grows from that point. He absorbed this without challenging it. That simple acceptance, his trust in what she was seeing, immediate and unqualified, did something to her that she filed away to feel fully later. Dax fell into step beside her. You look different, he said quietly. I feel different, she said. The gift? Fully open. She glanced at him. You were right, by the way. About telling him. I'm regularly right, Dax said. He rarely acknowledges it. I'm standing right here, Caelan said from her other side. I know, Dax said serenely. She felt Caelan's exasperation through the bond like a warm pulse and had to press her lips together. They reached the river at full dark. The Caelan River was narrow here, 30 feet across, quick and cold, the water dark in the moonlight. The stone sat at the river's eastern bank, half-submerged, ancient granite worn smooth by centuries of current. It was unremarkable to look at. But the lines. The lines around it were extraordinary. She stood at the edge of the water and stared at the invisible architecture surrounding that stone, the tangle of conclave claim threads, anchored deep into the granite, radiating outward in every direction, spanning, she now understood, across all 6 northern territories like a web from a central, hidden point. It's here, she said. Caelan stood beside her. Rael and her scouts fanned out silently, taking positions in the trees. Dax positioned himself at the tree line, watching east. How does it work? Caelan asked. Quiet. Close. I'm not entirely certain, she admitted. The records described it as reading the lines and finding the point of falsification. Then introducing the correction. She paused. Like finding a false knot in a rope and untying it. And the false knot here is? The original bond, she said. 60 years ago, the Conclave's founder established the succession claim by forcing a pact submission, coercing the surrender of 6 alpha bonds into the Conclave's authority through threat and manipulation. She could see it clearly. The falsified surrender. The forced thread binding. The wolves who submitted didn't do so freely. Pack law requires free submission for a territorial bond to hold. She looked at him. This bond has been invalid for 60 years. I'm going to prove it. She stepped into the river. The cold hit her immediately, bone deep, shocking, the current pushing at her legs. Caelan's hand caught her wrist. She looked back at him. The worry on his face was unguarded. I'll be right here, he said. I know, she said. He released her. She waded to the stone. Pressed both palms flat against the wet granite. And the gift opened fully, completely, without restraint. The world went somewhere else. She was inside the lines. She could see them from the inside now, the full, ancient, sprawling architecture of the Conclave's territorial claim, mapped in threads of cold silver and forced blue, pressing down on territories that had never agreed to carry them. She followed them to the root. Found the original knot. The false submission, 6 alpha bonds, forced and falsified, bound to the Conclave's anchor thread with the specific magical violence of a power that had never legitimately earned what it claimed. She could see the threads. She could see where the falsification began. She reached for it, not physically, but with the part of her that the gift inhabited, and she pulled. The resistance was enormous. 60 years of installed authority, all of it pressing back. Like trying to reverse a river. Like trying to undo something that had been calcifying for a generation, that every structure built on top of it had grown dependent on, that the Conclave had reinforced and maintained and defended with every resource available to them. She pulled harder. Her hands on the stone were numb. She could feel the bond to Caelan, through the bond, warm and certain and present even from the riverbank. Not pushing. Not directing. Just there. An anchor. The steady, irreducible fact of a completed bond freely given. It was exactly what she needed. She pulled. The first thread broke. The sound, not a sound, but the felt equivalent, was like a bell being struck in the center of her chest. Deep and resonant and real. She felt it go through her completely. She found the second thread. Behind her, at the riverbank, she heard Dax say something sharp. And then Caelan, east. They're early. Rail. Voices. Movement. The sound of combat forming in the treeline. She couldn't stop. She was inside the bond structure. If she stopped now, the threads would reseal, the damage would repair, everything she'd undone would lock back into place. She had to finish. She pulled the second thread. It broke harder. A third. The cold of the river was gone. The sound of the forest was gone. She was completely inside the work, the gift burning through her like fever, like sunlight, like everything at once. A hand on her shoulder. Don't stop, Caelan said at her ear. He was standing in the river beside her. Water up to his knees. One hand on her shoulder, warm and solid and real. Don't stop. I've got you. He'd come into the water. With the Conclave forces breaking through the treeline. He'd come to stand beside her. She didn't have words for what that did. She found the fourth thread. The fifth. The sixth. The final. She pulled. The world came apart. Not violently, not explosively. More like something tightly held being released all at once. The Conclave's succession bond, 60 years of false claim, 6 territories, the entire manufactured authority of the Eastern Conclave's northern dominion, unraveled. She felt it go. She felt it go everywhere simultaneously, the 6 territories, every bonded alpha in the north who had been living under the weight of a claim they'd never chosen. She felt it lift. Like a held breath being released. Like something heavy being taken from shoulders that had forgotten what it felt like to stand without it. She felt them feel it. Every alpha in the Northern Territory. All at once. The truth, delivered without words. The false claim, exposed and dissolved. She came back to herself on her hands and knees against the riverbank, the cold water surging around her, Caelan's arms around her, pulling her up. She was shaking. "I have you," he said against her hair. "I have you." She pressed her face against his chest. Breathed. Around them, the forest had gone strange. The combat, the conclave wolves who had broken through the treeline, had stopped. She could hear it. The absence of it. The specific, disoriented silence of fighters who have just felt something fundamental shift beneath their feet. Because they had. Because every wolf in that force, every one who carried a pack bond, who felt the territorial authority of the Eastern Conclave as a weight in their chest, had just felt that authority dissolve. Just like that. She heard one of them say something. She didn't catch the words. But she caught the tone. Lost. The authority that had anchored the Conclave's power for 60 years was gone. The war that had been coming had changed shape. And in the cold water of the Caelan River, something else was beginning. Chapter 11. The Conclave forces retreated. Not all at once, not the clean, decisive withdrawal of an ordered army receiving a tactical command. This was something different. Something more disoriented. Wolves moving back through the treeline in clusters, the sounds of organization giving way to something quieter, something that was less like retreat and more like people trying to find their footing on ground that had suddenly changed beneath them. Rail reported no fatalities. 3 Iron Veil wolves with injuries, none critical. Several Conclave wolves who had been engaged at close range when the dissolution hit and had simply stopped. Not surrendered, exactly. But stopped. Unsure how to proceed when the authority they'd been fighting for had dissolved mid-operation. Dax called it, with characteristic precision, beautifully timed chaos. He was grinning when he said it. The night unfolded in stages. First, the immediate tactical cleanup. Rail's scouts securing the perimeter. The wounded attended to. The eastern border locked down pending what came next. Second, the communications. Because the dissolution had been felt, not just by the Conclave forces, but across the Northern Territory. 6 alphas, suddenly free of a 60-year claim they'd assumed was simply the shape of the world. 6 alphas, simultaneously realizing that the annual tributes and territory right negotiations and ascension approvals they had been submitting to Conclave authority were no longer legally binding. The first contact came from the alpha of the Greymount pack before they'd made it back to the castle. A wolf Caelan knew, had known for years, had maintained carefully neutral relations with, both of them trapped in a system neither had chosen. The message was short. What just happened? And how do we talk? Dax laughed when he read it. Caelan didn't laugh. But the tight, 6-year tension around his eyes loosened in a way she hadn't seen before. She did not miss it. Third, the council. The Elder Council assembled at midnight, all of them, Soren's seat conspicuously and permanently empty. Serafina presented what she had done and what it meant with the clear, factual precision of someone who had been processing implications since the river. The council listened. Elder Callum, when she finished, said, "The Eastern Conclave has no more legal basis for territorial claim." "No," she confirmed. "Which means the border breach tonight was a military action without legitimate authority," she said. "Which changes how we respond diplomatically as well as defensively." She looked around the table. We're not defending against a valid territorial dispute. We're defending against an illegal military incursion. The distinction matters in Continental Pact law. It means we can bring it to the Continental Council, Elder Vessa said slowly. Yes. With the archive documentation and tonight's evidence. She paused. The conclave's leadership will attempt to establish alternate legal grounds for their authority. That process takes months, minimum. In the interim, they have no basis for military action against any northern territory. She held the council's gaze. We have a window. To build the coalition Iron Veil needs. To bring the other 5 territories into alignment. You're talking about rebuilding northern governance, Callum said. From the actual foundation, she said. Not the one they installed. The silence that followed was not empty. It was the silence of people understanding the scope of something and beginning, carefully, to believe it was possible. She found Caelan on the eastern parapet after the council adjourned. The highest point of the castle. Open to the sky. Dark mountains in every direction, the Cael River a distant silver line in the valley, the forest quiet and enormous and full of its own ancient logic. He was standing at the parapet edge the way she'd seen him at windows, present, alert, but with a quietness to him that was different from the vigilance that usually governed his stillness. She stood beside him. Neither of them spoke immediately. The cold was significant. He shrugged off his jacket without being asked and settled it around her shoulders. She didn't protest. It smelled like cedar. Like him. Through the bond, she felt his attention wrap around her as certainly as the jacket. How are you? He asked. Not are you well in the functional, assessment-oriented sense. How are you? The actual question. She considered it honestly. Tired, she said. And she paused. I feel like I've been a closed door for 23 years and someone finally opened it. She looked at the dark mountains. It's a lot. It is, he agreed. How are you? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. Relieved, he said. In a way I don't have vocabulary for. He looked at her. And aware that I spent 47 days making decisions that, if made differently, might have, he stopped. You found the library yourself. You figured out Soren. You held the council. You went to the river and undid something that was 60 years built. He held her gaze. You did most of this in spite of how I handled the beginning. You were trying to protect me, she said. I was trying to control the outcome, he said, with the precision of a man who had done a significant amount of honest self-examination over the past several days. I told myself it was protection. And it was that too. But it was also, he stopped. Fear, she said quietly. He looked at her. Yes, he said. Of what? He was quiet for a long moment. Of the bond, he said. Of what it meant. Of what it would require of me. He looked at the mountains. I have spent 6 years learning to carry this pack alone. Making decisions without the risk of what it costs when you let someone in and he stopped again. My father, he said carefully, made a political bond. A cold arrangement. And it was practical and functional and, he paused. Watching it. Growing up inside it. He shook his head. I decided I wouldn't do that. And when the only alternative was a real bond, a true bond, I panicked. She looked at him. So you locked me in a room, she said. Gently. So I locked you in a room, he confirmed. Quietly. Which was? Not your finest strategy, she offered. His expression shifted, that almost smile again, but deeper. Warmer. Less guarded than any version of it she'd seen before. Not my finest strategy, he agreed. She turned to face him. He turned toward her. Close. The bond was very warm between them, full and complete and no longer straining toward itself because it had found itself, was resting in itself, with the specific settled quality of something that had always been true and was now simply acknowledged. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Tell me." "When I was in that East Wing room, alone, for 47 days, I could feel you through the bond." She held his gaze. "I could feel you working. Moving. The weight you were carrying." She paused. "And even then, even when I thought it was rejection, even when I believed you were simply ashamed of what you'd married, I could feel that you weren't cruel." She watched his face. Misguided. Stubborn. Catastrophically uncommunicative. A pause. "But not cruel." He was very still. "And I want you to know," she continued, "that that is what made this possible. Not the gift. Not the bond. That." She held his gaze. "You were never actually indifferent." He exhaled. Long and slow. And then, not with the careful, managed gesture of before, not with the deliberate, considered movement of a man trying not to reveal too much, he reached out and pulled her in. Not gently. Fully. Completely. His arms around her with the total, unguarded commitment of someone who had decided to stop calculating the risk. She pressed her face to his throat. Felt his arms tighten. Felt the bond settle into something that was not a question anymore. They stood on the parapet while the cold moved around them and the mountains stood dark and enormous in every direction, and the world below them was changed, quietly, permanently, at the root. "Caelan," she said against his shoulder. The Eastern Conclave is not going to accept this quietly." "No," he agreed. "Their leadership will regroup. Find legal arguments. Possibly military alternatives. Yes. We have months of work ahead." "Yes." His arms tightened slightly. "Months." She smiled. "But not tonight," she said. "No," he said quietly. "Not tonight." The war was not over. Wars like this were never over in a single night. But the ground had changed beneath it. And the people standing on that ground had changed too. Chapter 12. 3 months later. The Northern Coalition met at Ironvale for the first time in 60 years. 6 alphas around a table that had not held this particular configuration in a generation. Greymount and Ashfin and Duskridge and 2 others, packs that had existed under Conclave authority so long that the initial communications had been careful, half-believing. The tentative language of people testing whether a door was actually open before walking through it. It was open. Seraphina had made sure of that. She had spent 3 months doing what she had done in the Hidden Library and the Elder Council Chamber and the Cael River, seeing clearly, speaking precisely, and trusting that the truth, given enough light, could hold its own weight. She had drafted the coalition charter with Elder Callum and a Greymount representative named Ferris who had, initially, been skeptical of everything about the situation and had become, gradually, one of the most useful allies she had. She had navigated 3 separate attempts by Conclave loyalists to re-establish legal basis for territorial claim, each time bringing the archive documentation and the Continental Pact law specifics to the relevant arbitration body with the calm, methodical efficiency of someone who had been raised on Pact ledgers and didn't find legal architecture intimidating. The Conclave's current leadership had been brought before the Continental Council. The tribunal was ongoing. It would take another 6 months, possibly a year. She had submitted the primary evidence herself. She had also, in the quieter work of those 3 months, begun to understand the full scope of what she could see. The fate lines. She had learned, carefully and slowly, the limits of the gift. What it could and couldn't do. Where intervention was appropriate and where it was interference. She had learned to see without assuming she should act, to read the lines and offer what she saw to the people who needed to make decisions, rather than making decisions for them. She had learned this, in significant part, from watching Caelan. Watching him lead. He had changed too. Not fundamentally, the core of him, that absolute, bone-deep commitment to this pack and its people, remained as it had always been. But the shape of it had opened. He consulted. He brought her fully into the war council, the strategic planning, the diplomatic negotiations. He had introduced her, in the coalition meeting, as Luna Serafina Draven, my mate and my equal counsel in all matters of Ironvale governance. Elder Callum had nodded. Dax had looked insufferably pleased with himself. She had kept her expression composed with some effort. The meeting ended at dusk. The 6 alphas departed, back to their territories, carrying the coalition charter and the first framework of a northern governance structure that was theirs, built by them, answering to no manufactured authority. The great hall emptied slowly. Dax disappeared in the direction of the kitchens with the focused purposefulness of a man who had been professionally tactful all day and needed sustenance. She found Caelan where she had come to recognize he went when a significant thing had concluded, at the window of the war chamber, looking out at the forest. Not with the tense, prowling restlessness of before. With something quieter. She stood beside him. Greymount Alpha Ferris told me something interesting before he left, she said. He said he'd heard rumors, before tonight, about the Ironvale Luna. She glanced at Caelan's profile. He'd heard she was being kept secret. That the Alpha was hiding her. He came into these meetings expecting, she paused. He told me he wasn't sure what to expect. Caelan glanced at her. What did you say? I said that the beginning of our story was complicated, she said. And that the middle was considerably better. Considerably, he repeated. His word was actually formidable. She met his gaze. Referring to me. Something warm moved through his expression. He's not wrong, Caelan said quietly. I know, she said. He laughed. It was brief and real and surprised out of him, and it was the best thing she'd heard in 3 months. She stored it away with the other things she was beginning to collect, the small, unguarded moments that his armor didn't prevent because it had become, incrementally and not always smoothly, less of a necessity. He reached out. Found her hand. Held it, not the ceremonial grip of a bonding ceremony, not the gesture of someone going through the motions of a political arrangement. Just his hand, warm and certain around hers, with the uncomplicated naturalness of something that had become habitual. She turned her hand over. Held him back. The bond was quiet. Not silent, it was never silent anymore, but the hum of it had settled into something she could only describe as home. A frequency she was so accustomed to she only noticed it when she paid attention to it, the way you only notice the sound of a house you've lived in for years when you listen for it specifically. There's going to be more, he said. The tribunal. The conclave's response when the verdict comes. The coalition governance negotiations. The gift implications, he glanced at her. You're going to be a significant figure in Northern Pack politics for a very long time. I know, she said. I'm sorry, he said. For how it started. Stop, she said. Serafina. You've apologized. I've heard it. I believe it. She looked at him. And I'm telling you to stop carrying it, because it's done and we're here and what's in front of us is more interesting than what's behind. She held his gaze. We are not defined by the locked room. He looked at her. For a moment, just looked at her with his golden eyes and everything in them that he'd learned, over 3 months, to stop concealing. What are we defined by? He asked. She thought about it. The library, she said. At midnight. When I found the book. She paused. And every room since then. He pulled her in. She went. The bond between them was warm and complete and entirely, permanently, irrevocably real. Outside the window, the Caelan River forest stretched dark and enormous into the evening, and the mountains stood where they had always stood, and the pack of Ironvale moved through its village in the valley below, laughing, arguing, living, free. Not because the gift had saved them. Because two people had, in their difficult and complicated and entirely imperfect way, chosen each other. And sometimes that was enough to change everything. 6 months later. She stood at the edge of the great hall and watched her pack. Her pack. The word had stopped feeling foreign around the 2-month mark. Now it simply felt true, not a claim she'd made, but a fact that had settled into place through the accumulation of mornings and councils and difficult conversations and small moments too numerous to catalogue. The winter gathering was the largest Iron Veil celebration of the year. She had been to every one since her emergence from the East Wing. She had attended the autumn harvest, the mid-year council feast, the 3 coalition summits. She had stood at the head of this hall more times than she could count. The winter gathering was different. This was the one that mattered most to the pack, the communal celebration of survival and belonging, the ritual of wolves who understood, in their bones, that the darkness of winter required the particular warmth of each other to endure. The hall was full. Loud. Alive. Warriors and elders and ranked members and children, yes, children, running between the tables with the specific chaos of small wolves who had not yet learned to modulate their energy, and the overlapping sounds of a community that was thriving. Elder Vesa appeared at her elbow. Luna Serafina. The old woman's eyes were warm with something Serafina had come to recognize as genuine affection. "You look well." "I feel well," she said. "Truly." The coalition news from the Continental Council. "Favorable," she confirmed. "The preliminary ruling is expected within the month. The conclave's legal standing is not recoverable at this point." She paused. "We won, Elder Vesa." The old woman was quiet for a moment. "You know," Vesa said, "there were those of us on the council, when the Alpha first took his position, 6 years ago, who worried. He was so certain. So isolated." She glanced at Serafina. "We needed him to be exactly that, for a long time. The certainty. The will." She paused. "But a pack needs more than certainty. It needs someone who can see what the Alpha cannot. Who can say what the Alpha will not." She smiled, small and warm. "You were worth waiting for, even if the waiting took an unusual form." Serafina thought of 47 mornings. "An unusual form," she agreed dryly. Vesa laughed. Touched her arm. And moved away into the hall. Serafina looked for him. Found him, of course she found him, the bond made it automatic and effortless, across the hall. He was deep in conversation with the Greymount Alpha, who had, over 6 months, moved from skeptical to allied to something that looked, cautiously, like genuine mutual respect. He must have felt her looking. He glanced over. Found her across the hall instantly, the same way she'd found him, the bond doing what it had been built to do. He looked at her. And something in his expression, even across the hall, even surrounded by people and noise and the ongoing press of responsibilities that would never fully stop, something in his expression went quiet in the specific way that was hers. Just hers. She put her hand briefly to her sternum. The bond pulsed back. Warm. Certain. His. She smiled. And she walked into the hall. Into the noise and the warmth and the complicated, thriving, entirely imperfect reality of a pack that was hers and a bond that was real and a life that had been, improbably, worth all the locked rooms. She walked toward him. He excused himself from his conversation. Met her halfway. "The hall is full," she said, when they were close enough for quiet words. "It is," he agreed. "This time last year." "Don't," he said. But gently. "I was going to say," she continued, "that this time last year, I couldn't have imagined being here. In this hall. Like this." She looked around at the people, the pack. Her pack. "And now I can't imagine being anywhere else." He was quiet. She looked up at him. Found him watching her with that expression, the unguarded one, the one that still surprised her every time it surfaced, not because it was rare anymore but because she hadn't expected to want it so much. "Caelan," she said. "Yes." "Take me home," she said. He held out his hand. She took it. They left the hall together, the Alpha and his Luna, the bonded pair, the couple who had begun in a room with no flowers and ended in a kingdom rebuilt from its own truth. Not perfectly. Not simply. But together. Completely, permanently, irrevocably together. And that, in the end, is what the pack remembered. Not the war. Not the conclave. Not the 60 years of stolen authority or the night at the river or the political triumph of the Northern Coalition. What they remembered was the moment their Alpha walked into the great hall on a winter night with his Luna at his side and looked at her like she was the reason the hall was full. Like she was the reason the pack was whole. Like she was, simply, everything. And what Serafina Voss Draven remembered, above all the rest, was that she had been locked in a beautiful room for 47 days. And she had found the door herself. And what waited on the other side of it had been, in all the ways that mattered, worth finding. Found him watching her with that expression, the unguarded one, the one that still surprised her every time it surfaced, not because it was rare anymore but because she hadn't expected to want it so much. "Caelan," she said. "Yes." "Take me home," she said. He held out his hand. She took it. They left the hall together, the Alpha and his Luna, the bonded pair, the couple who had begun in a room with no flowers and ended in a kingdom rebuilt from its own truth. Not perfectly. Not simply. But together. Completely, permanently, irrevocably together. And that, in the end, is what the pack remembered. Not the war. Not the conclave. Not the 60 years of stolen authority or the night at the river or the political triumph of the Northern Coalition. What they remembered was the moment their Alpha walked into the great hall on a winter night with his Luna at his side and looked at her like she was the reason the hall was full. Like she was the reason the pack was whole. Like she was, simply, everything. And what Serafina Voss Draven remembered, above all the rest, was that she had been locked in a beautiful room for 47 days. And she had found the door herself. And what waited on the other side of it had been, in all the ways that mattered, worth finding.